The body in the Tesla, the Celeste Rivas Hernandez case. September 8, 2020. An investigator in Los Angeles opened the front trunk of an impounded Tesla. Within seconds, he realized he had just stepped into one of the most disturbing homicide investigations the city had seen in years. Inside were bags containing human remains. A's detectives examined the contents. They identified the victim as 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. She had been missing for months. No one expected the investigation to eventually focus on a rising young musician who was building a rapidly growing career and attracting a massive online following. His name was David Burke. To understand how detectives arrived at that point, we have to go back several months. In the spring of 2025, Celeste disappeared. Her family immediately became concerned. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages stopped. Friends could not reach her. According to prosecutors, April 23, 2025 was believed to be the last day Celeste was seen alive. Investigators later alleged that she had gone to meet David Burke that evening. After that, she vanished. For her family, every passing day brought more fear and fewer answers. At first, they hoped she had simply run away and would return home. As the weeks passed, that hope began to fade. Meanwhile, David Burke's career continued to rise. His music was gaining attention. His audience was growing. New opportunities appeared to be opening up for him almost every month. To the public, he looked like a young artist on the verge of major success. Behind the scenes, however, detectives were beginning to examine a different side of the story. One of the first questions investigators explored was the nature of the relationship between David and Celeste. Prosecutors would later allege that the relationship involved conduct with a minor. The defense denied those allegations. But detectives believed understanding that relationship was critical to understanding what happened to Celeste. Who knew about it? How long had it been going on? And could it explain her disappearance? For months, investigators worked quietly. There were no dramatic press conferences, no public arrests, no major announcements. Many people criticized law enforcement, arguing that the case seemed stalled. But detectives were building a homicide case they believed could withstand scrutiny in court. They knew that if they moved too quickly, any mistake could jeopardize the entire investigation. Then came September 8, 2025. Everything changed. The discovery inside the Tesla transformed a missing person case into a homicide investigation. The remains found inside the vehicle were identified as Celeste. The condition of the remains shocked even experienced investigators. According to the autopsy findings later discussed in court proceedings, the body was in an advanced state of decomposition. The remains had been separated into multiple parts and placed inside bags stored within the vehicle. Medical examiners concluded that Celeste had died from sharp force injuries to the chest. The discovery raised even more questions. Who had placed the remains inside the Tesla? How long had they been there? And who was responsible for Celeste's death? Detectives immediately expanded their investigation. Search warrants were obtained. Digital evidence was seized. Witnesses were interviewed. Phones, computers, cloud accounts, messages, photographs, and videos became part of an enormous evidence review. According to prosecutors, investigators eventually collected tens of terabytes of digital material. The sheer volume suggested a case far more complex than the public initially realized. As the investigation continued, public attention intensified. Many people began examining David Burke's music and public image. One song in particular became the subject of widespread discussion. Critics argued that some of the lyrics seemed disturbing in light of the allegations. Others argued that artistic expression should never be treated as evidence of criminal conduct. The debate spread across social media and news outlets. For detectives, however, the focus remained on evidence rather than public speculation. The question was not what people believed. The question was what could be proven. Months passed. Autumn turned into winter. Winter turned into spring. The public continued to ask the same question. Would anyone ever be arrested? Then, on April 16, 2026, investigators made their move. Detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department's Robbery Homicide Division arrested David Burke in Hollywood Hills. Video footage captured the operation. Officers surrounded the property and took extensive precautions. The arrest immediately became national news. A missing 14-year-old girl. Human remains found inside a Tesla. A rising musician accused of murder. The story quickly dominated headlines. Just days later, prosecutors formally announced criminal charges. David Burke was charged with first-degree murder and additional special circumstances allegations. If convicted, he could face the most severe penalties available under California law. The announcement stunned many of his supporters. But prosecutors were not finished. Additional allegations involving sexual conduct with a minor were also revealed. Those accusations intensified public outrage. Because throughout the investigation, one fact remained impossible to ignore. Celeste was only 14 years old. She was a child, a teenager whose future had barely begun. At his court appearance, David Burke entered a plea of not guilty. His attorney strongly denied the allegations. They argued that the evidence would ultimately show he was not responsible for Celeste's death. The defense insisted prosecutors had not proven their case. That legal battle is now at the center of the proceedings. Prosecutors say they possess an enormous amount of evidence. Defense attorneys say the evidence will not support the charges. and a jury will eventually have to decide which side is right. One of the most significant revelations involved the amount of digital evidence collected during the investigation. Prosecutors stated that approximately 40 terabytes of material had been gathered. That figure represents an extraordinary amount of information. Investigators reportedly spent months reviewing electronic records, communications, and other digital evidence as they built their case. The prosecution has also suggested a possible motive. According to court filings and statements discussed publicly, investigators believe Celeste may have possessed information that could have damaged David Burke's career and public image. If true, prosecutors argue that information could have threatened lucrative opportunities, business relationships, endorsements, and future earnings. The defense disputes those claims. Whether prosecutors can prove motive remains one of the many questions that will ultimately be addressed in court. Today, the case remains one of the most closely watched criminal prosecutions in the United States. The prosecution says it has the evidence. The defense says it does not. A family continues to wait for answers, and a jury will eventually determine the outcome. But regardless of what happens in court, one fact remains undeniable. A 22-year-old girl disappeared. Months later, her remains were discovered inside a Tesla. What happened between those two moments remains at the heart of a case that has shocked the nation and left investigators searching for every remaining piece of the truth.